future will make us. We're stronger than that. Trouble comes screaming, we always holler back. Don't let it get us down or throw some.
Welcome to We the People, brought to you by concerned citizens and members of the Fort Wayne 912 group. We are here today to continue our discussion of Common Core, the new educational mandate brought to us by the federal government. If you were not able to see our other presentation that we had earlier, please log on to www.fortwayne912.com and you can see that one at any time if it's your convenience. Our panel today is Joy Pullman and Bill Wilcox and Dawn Kazmierzak, and I am Carmen Young. Let's continue discussing the things about the Common Core. I'm really concerned about the data collection part. Bill, can you tell me what you know about that?
Yeah, basically there are going to be 400 different points of information that they're going to be collecting about our children and our families and our households. This includes such, I'm not sure why, but useless information as bus stop times. It even involves political affiliations, religious affiliations and backgrounds. It'll also include household income and things of that nature. The data collection also kind of gets into something a little weird of what we call biometric monitoring. And there are multiple devices that'll be instituted in the classroom. They will be a facial recognition camera, and if we could just get a zoom in on that. It'd be a facial recognition camera. There will also be a posture analysis sheet. There'll be a pressure mouse and a wristband that will basically monitor vital signs. So when this is all fully implemented, a student's physical reactions to things being lectured about in the classroom will be tracked and monitored. So they'll be collecting the data on that. So let's say, for instance, a teacher brings up an issue that's kind of controversial. Recently, at the time of the taping of this program, gay marriage was a hot issue in public debate. Now, if a teacher brings up that issue and talks about it, and a student squirms in their chair because it's not something their parents have instilled in them or they believe in, and they roll their eyes, the facial recognition camera will pick that up. Their heart rate might increase, and the vital signs show a reaction to that statement. It's kind of a Big Brother thing, but kind of a Orwellian 1984 thing. But it could be used to flag that student.
Can I give some
Flag him for what?
Go ahead.
Well,
I was going to add a few things about that.
Sure,
the
go right
data
ahead.
points that Bill mentioned are from the National Education Data Model. So that's a template that the federal government, the National Center for Education Statistics, has been providing for states to use as they are required under several different grants and contracts with the federal government to be creating longitudinal data systems. So right now, that is a model, a template for states to use. And as far as I know, states are moving toward that, and they haven't done all of that yet. The second thing to understand is the bill is talking about a report from the U.S. Department of Education when he's talking about biometric, monitoring of students, how they sit in chairs, the sweat, sweat on their skin and so forth. And that's talking about the Department of Education is encouraging research in that area, but there aren't any plans to roll that out in everybody's school district nationwide. Now, some school districts are doing some similar programs. We've heard about, especially in the Fort Wayne area, there's fingerprint scans to get your school lunch. Another mom just emailed me this week about fingerprint scans to go check a book out of the school library, and so on and so forth. So
we also had a call from a teacher that she believed iris scans had been being done for the last year in the Fort Wayne schools as well. And we know that Florida is doing those biometrics as well, too.
So what is going on where really depends on the local school district and the state and the sort of policies. But, that's a template for what the federal government thinks is a good amount of information for states to be collecting on children eventually.
And yet we know with the legislation that changed, this is not being done with the consent of parents because that personal identifier information has been taken away. So we realize that as all 50 states have taken on these longitudinal data systems, that really there is no parental oversight over this at all. So your children's information is going to a distant entity, basically wherever they want it to go.
And the U.S. Department of Education just changed federal privacy law in 2012 to say that any data about your child that a school collects can be distributed to anyone without parent knowledge or consent. So that includes a volunteer at the school, it includes a private company, it includes the Department of Labor, whoever, you know, the school, the state, the federal Department of Education feels you should get that data can have it without you knowing about it.
Right, and the important thing to note about those changes, I mean, the biggest thing about government is always the focus needs to be on the process. Is the process being followed? In what you're talking about in changing the FERPA laws, it wasn't changing the laws because it was not an act of Congress.
Right.
Changing a law requires an act of Congress. Changing a regulation can be done by a government agency. Now that's unconstitutional and that's a whole other debate, but that's important to understand that your elected official did not sit around in the Congress, sit in the chambers and vote to change your right to privacy with your child. So they no longer have to come to the parent to give out this personal private information.
Which, as you probably know, Dawn, is completely different from the way that medical laws work. You know, because they're hugely strict, you know, secrecy around. You have to go through so many hoops.
There
to be
used
able
to be,
release
but
that
now there isn't. You know, people recognize that HIPAA is worthless. HIPAA really was never meant to protect your information. HIPAA was so that there would be portability in that information. And so what's happened is that it has been a misnomer. Gary Bauer and I have been emailing about that as well, as the IRS requisitioned 70 million health records. But people have this idea that HIPAA is protecting them. HIPAA is not protecting them. And so actually, as an electronic health records in the medical field, we all know that you can type in anyone's name and you can find out anything you want to about that individual. There is no protection in that. That is part of the new Affordable Health Care Act as well. So your information is not private in healthcare at all. And that's very documented among the healthcare practitioners. It's an atrocity because people really don't realize that when they go in for an appointment, they should not be giving all that information. It's very much in their right to say, I'm not going to answer that
and that's
question.
The same thing with schools too.
That's
a parent
right.
has the right to walk into their child's school and say, what is in my child's file? I want to see it. They can have the right to have their child refuse tests, you know, to refuse to answer certain questions and so on and so forth. So parents really do have the control, but you need to start at the parent level because once it enters the system, you do not have the control.
You have
over
no
where
control
it ends up.
once it's in there.
I understand that the Common Core is partnered with Health and Human Services. How is this affected?
How it is, Health and Human Services is also what is with healthcare and things like that. And so everything that is in there as far as the medications that child would take, the psychological evaluations that they would have, any type of therapy they would have, any type of conflict resolution, things that are in the family system. And as we know that the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities is again coming up to be ratified in our nation, even though we turned that down in, I think it was December. But that also is linked with that in that any children with special needs or whatever's labeled as disabilities, when my mom was in Europe under Hitler, asthma was a disability. Those individuals will no longer be under the guidance of their parents for their education and their health care. That is going to be under the direction of the United Nations committees. So we have to recognize that this is far-reaching. Now that we live in such a global community, your information is not your information, and those decisions are not the parent's decision anymore.
So if a child has a learning style that is not addressed by this new Common Core standards and he's very restless, is it possible the school district will force the family to put him on drugs?
I think that's already being done. How many boys are on Ritalin?
A massive. I mean, the number that's going through my head is a third of all boys are on drugs. The New York Times wrote about this about 2 months ago. So you want to get the accurate number, you should look that up. But it's shocking the number of young people who are on all kinds of psychotropic drugs in schools. And a lot of times, teachers, will pressure to have the parents have their doctor evaluate their child. And of course, many children do have medical needs that need to be addressed with drugs. But at the same time, there's a difference between a very active young person, and one who's biologically, needs some help, some medical help.
The problem with doing that, though, is those drugs were never intended to be used on developing people. Those drugs, when they were initially devised, those were for adults. And so what they're finding now is they put children on those type of pharmacological interventions. Once they'll be on a Ritalin or a Cylert, then they're on something like anti-anxiety, antidepressant. So we end up with a whole medical cocktail by the time the child is out of high school, and they're on about 5 different drugs, and you've really altered their neurochemistry. You know, you cannot take a drug in a receptor site blocking something that you're altering another function that would normally be happening later down the road. So it's a huge it's a huge picture of trying to make children sit in a classroom when they need to move. Children physically need to move. They cannot sit at a computer screen all
At
day
least
long.
my children.
Yes, I think every child is. We're all different. So this title of ADHD and ADD, sensory processing disorder, emotional anxiety, and actually we're having record numbers of suicide in young people. I mean, this is huge. There's a great deal of pressure to perform on these tests, and there's a great deal of pressure to have yourself sit still, control, medicated, and many of the children now don't come from nurturing backgrounds, and so they're certainly not finding that in the school system either.
So do you predict this will probably tend to increase the probability of more suicides for the children that find this kind of curriculum pointless?
I think that it would cause a great deal of discouragement if you feel that you really can't grasp these concepts that are being presented, and your parents can't help you grasp them either if you have a parent or 2 parents. Then you feel very defeated in your own abilities to learn that there's something must be wrong with you. And so I think that causes children to seek out other areas to gain attachment or to gain role models and things that way, but it certainly doesn't encourage their desire to learn. It's certainly not going to be conducive when we are all different. We all learn different ways. We're all not all widgets. We are unique individuals, and this common core mentality does not seem to address that individual uniqueness of each of our children.
When I was in college studying to be a teacher, that was something everybody was focusing on. That was the new thing in education, is addressing the variety of learning styles, understanding the learning styles of your students. And they had a whole lots and lots of different ways that you could teach the same subject.
And that philosophy it's a starting ground, but we work with actually he's a cognitive psychologist, and he's in Israel. He's the man who tutored Piaget's children, and he is responsible for getting Israel's education started and things. But we talk about learning styles. We may all have a platform of a learning style, but we do not want that to become a crippling thing. Right now, what's happened in education is many children have been told, you're only an auditory learner, you're only a visual learner, and if the teacher doesn't teach in all these multiple modes, then you can get out of that classroom, or it must be her fault. We want the child to use every sense that we have. We want to be tactile, we want to be auditory, we want to be visual. We don't want to cripple you to only be able to hop on one auditory foot around the classroom. We want to get to the point where you can use all the different senses that you have. So we have to be real careful that while that is good to talk about an initial auditory learner, we want you to become a visual learner as well. We want you to become a tactile learner as well. We don't want to cripple you. We want you to grow and keep growing. There's no boundaries.
Well, if this education is going to be focused mostly on computers and such, you're not going to have the variety of input.
No, it doesn't seem that way. It seems very limited to, actually what you're going to have is you're going to have a drowning of the sensory system with visual and auditory, very graphic, and you're not going to have a way to filter out whether you should be watching that much. I'm an optometrist as well in neurobiology. This is a nightmare for a neurobiologist, because you look at what's happening. When you look at something, literally your whole brain is drowning in that visual input, and you cannot get it back out again. So there's no filtering of a parent to decide, is this really appropriate for my child to watch this or not, and is this going to be too much sensory information? And when they couple that with, it's a very emotional curriculum that we're forcing here. So we're putting a lot of emotion with that. So when you engage multiple sensory systems and now you put emotion with it, it is in there and you cannot get it out. And it's a very, very concerning.
Yeah, I think it's pretty far-fetched to think, to tie a link between suicides and a new style of learning. But to return to Common Core and how it ties into all of these ideas and different things, I think it's important for people to have some basic facts, settled in their minds. So people talking about Common Core, when you hear from people who support it, they will say, oh, Common Core is only education standards. It has nothing to do with data mining. That's other things that states have been doing. It's entirely separate. But actually, I just reread the contract that governors and state superintendents signed that started them off, that said, yes, we agree to Common Core. And in it says Common Core is standards plus testing. So we think that the initiative is two-part. It's not just this set of standards that defines curriculum. It also includes these testing. And so when I read the contracts between one of the testing groups and the federal government, they said we are interested in looking at things that are not just academic skills, behaviors, self-discipline, self-motivation, self-analysis, and so on and so forth. And those are the sort of things that parents start to get really dicey about, because analyzing a behavior or an attitude is extremely subjective. And so to what to one person might be bold courage, might be reckless endangerment, and so on and so forth. Or to some people consider a virtue to challenge and question authority, and other people, want you to be more submissive and go along with the crowd. So that entirely depends on the situation that the child is in. But it's also important, for people to know that even if states have protections for students' information, the contracts that they sign with these Common Core testing companies basically provide an open gate for the testing companies to send their child's information out to the federal government. So states, in their contracts with the Common Core testing groups, said basically two things. First of all, we'll submit our state legislatures to your authority. We will change our laws or our policies according to what you think is necessary to implement Common Core, which, if you care about procedure and elected representation, is completely outrageous, because state legislatures didn't sign these contracts in the first place, and they can't, bind future legislatures. But the second thing that includes, it says, we will give you whatever data you want about children. If you think it's necessary for these tests, you get it. And so then those Common Core testing groups in turn signed a contract with the federal government, who provided them all of their operating funds. And they said to the federal government, whatever data you want, whatever oversight you want, you can have it. So this is what I call, the child data pipeline, that even if your state has a privacy law, once it goes out of the state through those testing companies whose tests there's currently no independent review of, a board saying we're taking psychometric things off of their personal psychological profiling and so on and forth. We promise that will be on the test. It's, independently verified. So we have no guarantees that will be the case. And what that does is set up a situation, and basically there's no accountability for the personal things, about a minor, to their parents, the people who are their guardians. They can't control, the information about their child.
Well, that's a good point, because it's part of what we're talking about. There is no accountability in anything of this. This is totally no accountability. Those that, the NGA and the CCSSO, those that design this, have legally insulated themselves from any accountability. There's huge paragraphs where they talk about no liability of any of the, I should pull it over here.
Yeah, you want to read some of the quotes?
We should read some of the quotes here. Under no circumstances shall NGA Center or CCSSO individually or jointly be liable for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, exemplary, consequential, or punitive damages, however caused in on any legal theory of liability, whether for contract, tort, strict liability, or a combination thereof, including arising in any way out of the use of the Common Core state standards, even if advised of the possibility of such risk and potential damage, without limiting the foregoing licensee waives the right to seek legal redress against and releases from all liability and covenants not to sue NGA Center and CCSO. So basically, what we have is a giant.
We take no responsibility for anything that we did to America's children.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me.
We have this weapon of mass destruction, and we're insulating ourselves in a little bunker while you guys have to deal with the fallout of a whole generation of children.
But this is really great, and we want you all to do it, and it will be good for children, even though no one has ever tested
But
it.
we're not going to be responsible if it doesn't work. And it's just crazy,
And all of America's children are going to be subject to this. This is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Have you seen the quotation from David Coleman, president of the College Board? And he's talking about the partnership of Common Core with Obama's chief analytics officer, Dan Wagner. And Mr. Coleman
the data
thinks
team for Obama's presidential reelection.
Yep. And he thinks this is just wonderful, that the data they're mining out of your children is going to be forwarded to this chief analytics officer to do with whatever.
For a political party.
I find
They
that
need to
very,
analyze
very
children
scary.
in order to help them. It's only for the
And
children.
analyze their
I love how
families.
everything is always for the children.
I'm
And
detecting
analyze
your
their
sarcasm.
families. And when did we give him authority over our children?
That's
When-
right.
when was
That's
that
what-
was decided?
That's something that often comes, when I'm speaking to people about this. Who elected David Coleman?
Yes, how did he get in charge?
That's right.
Bill, I have one question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the how the children are receiving, they're giving information through as many modalities and the sensory thing and
bracelets
the
and-
bracelets
yeah,
and the eyes and
posture.
stuff. When they synthesize all this information and they put it in a data bank and somebody's going to process it, are they going to reprogram children and send them off to special reprogram classes if they don't have the standard
Well,
point of view?
You can certainly get into a conspiracy theory mode there on that, and I would say under other circumstances that's a little bit ludicrous, but when I start seeing in official government documents that the tools and the collection of the information is all there and it can all be put into place, I can draw my own conclusions. Everybody can draw their own conclusions. The thing is that the government is the last entity that you should ever trust. Because they pretty
As
much
the IRS has recently
has
proven.
recently proven, and other agencies,
Yeah.
with their stomping of rights and harassment. If this were maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I'd say that's crazy. But with the things that we have seen come to light in the news lately, I don't trust them any farther than I could throw them.
Well, if the IRS can persecute religions and
Yeah.
Jewish people and Christians and conservative groups for their ideology, there is no stopping them. And there's no reason to believe they wouldn't take this information and use it in some fashion you had never imagined.
Well, and it's like we just talked about, it's going to be filtered off to a campaign analyst for the Democratic Party.
Well, what
So-
really concerns me in this as a parent is treating children like they're machines. Push button here, output comes out there. And as anyone who even is in the medical field knows, the humans are so crazy complex that even medicines you think usually work often don't, depending on what everything is happening with that child.
But what we're seeing is the stage has been set by actually decades of operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner, Pavlov's dogs. We have a society that's really trained for external manipulation. And so now we give that to them. We provide that to them with a computer. It's you do this, you get an A, you do this, you get a candy, you get a pizza trip, you get a scholarship, and the parents think you know everything, and you think you know everything. So you really don't want to take the information too well either. So we have a society that's trained for external control. It does not work for a constitutional republic that is supposed to be intrinsically knowing what is right and wrong and to make those choices. But I have this a quandary where I can't understand how people can turn over the mind of a child to a federal government who openly kills children from conception to live birth. And so I wonder what the thinking process is in people where once, and I think children are thinking about this too. They've heard of abortion. They know it's happening. How can you allow an entity, a regime, or a government that does not seem to value life, and then yet you're going to give them these live children and do what they want with them?
Or as Bill and I were talking about before the program, he works in the IT field, and he just knows, when you kind of get into, you can probably explain this better, Bill, when you get into the tech mode, treating people more like, the programmable machines as rather than human beings who have hearts, passions, ideas, and so
Right.
forth.
Yeah. I
you
mean,
love.
Yes.
as a computer administrator, network administrator, you're responsible for tens of thousands of computers sometimes, depending on the size of the corporation or the entity, and you basically have to manage and control them and maintain them and inventory them and keep track of them, and everything becomes a number. So people that get into that mode of operating, that mindset, everything becomes a number. So you take a computer, pull it out of the box, and you put in a little child, and you can do
And
the
it's
same
the board.
thing. I mean,
this is like
it's
Star Trek's board.
yeah,
Remember that?
exactly,
The board,
and
you
it's
just put 'em in
it's
there
really
like-
it's really inhumane and it's really insensitive. But it's that's who these people are who think this way. And the unfortunate thing is that some parents may sit there and think, well, how do I get my kids out of this? I'll just keep them home, or maybe I'll send them to a private school. But what we can,
Homeschoolers are going to be affected as well.
That's
as
the other
SATs,
problem.
the ACTs, the Stanford 10, the Iowa basic test of basic skills. That David Coleman, the architect of the Common Core, is also the college president board. So all of those tests are now going to be aligned with that as well.
There is no test that I have been able to find that it does not now follow the Common
Wow.
Core progression. So if you are a homeschool or private school student and you want your child to go to college, they have to pass the SAT or SET, in order to, perform well, get accepted, get scholarships. And those are Common Core aligned. So, and in Indiana, where we have voucher schools, private schools that will take students using state funds, they have to administer the state tests, which in 2014, 2015 are going to be those Common Core tests that nobody's exactly sure what will
it's
be
going
on.
to be. So you can't even teach the test very well unless you use the core curriculum. That's the problem.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming today. It's been great hearing from all of you. You've shared a lot of valuable information, and I hope that our viewers have a chance to go to some of these meetings around town that we've spoken of before.
Yes.
We'll review. There's a couple of them coming up in July, Bill. When are they?
Yeah, we have Common Core presentations. One is going to be held at the DuPont Library on July 13th. That'll be at 10 a.m. to noon. The second one will be at the Aboit Library branch on July 24th. That'll be from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So if anybody can make it out there, that'd be great. You can also get these dates, times, locations on our website at fortwayne912.com. We're going to have more presentations over the next 3 months if you can't make it in July. There's also going to be some movie nights that we're going to have. We're going to show some great documentaries. So go to the website and get those dates. And we've got some other things coming up that...
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And what's happening in August?
August 3rd, Saturday, August 3rd, 10 o'clock to 12 p.m. at First Assembly of God, Fort Wayne. We're going to talk about the nationalized Common Core and how it affects everyone. Joy Pullman will be there. Senator Dennis Cruz will be there. Carrie Wicker, who is our Indiana Board of Education representative, as well as a panel of experts that are going to address some of your questions.
Do any of these meetings cost anything?
No,
You
it's
have to make a
absolutely
reservation.
free. No, you don't need to make a reservation.
We are setting up if you want to, it would help us just for chairs and we're going to try to provide some snacks and water and things. And that site is going to be politicalbox4ddr@gmail.com. That is a reservation, but you do not have to have the reservation, but it would just help a little bit for us keeping track of water and cookies.
Thank you so much. For the viewers, there's a few websites that I'd really like to encourage you to go to for more information about Common Core. www.truthinamericaneducation.com has a lot of information about Common Core. Please go there and look and share these sites with everyone you know. And Hoosiers Against Common Core is another good site. And then we have a lot of things on our site as well, www.fortwayne912.com. Stay informed. It's the best way. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining
Thank
us
you.
today.
Life on love, hope and faith. This is the start of the future we'll make, 'cause we're stronger than that. Trouble comes screaming.